Your hand is up, but you're on mute.
Good evening.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Great. I just thought maybe I'll just first apologies for the slight delay. Seemingly that our supposed to be first speaker thought they were gonna start at 6:30, but Unati was like, she's not gonna have any of that. Unfortunately, they've missed their boat. But otherwise, I just thought that I'll just come through and welcome everyone to our APC 2024 workshop. We're looking forward to engaging with you. We're looking forward for you to, as you have your last mile, to make sure that we fine tune those areas, and you also just get to have that last mile preparation. And one of the other aspects, which I just wanted to also emphasize, please make sure that you engage with our professional team tonight. Unati and Katehwa are really looking forward to it. Do not let them speak throughout. You guys have, I'm sure you have well prepared. You've watched Tina and Unati's reflection videos. So make sure that you engage with them. And for us, also, this is also a platform for you guys to also showcase your skills. Because you're almost there, you're almost ready to go and show Saika, ICAS, ICANN, to show that you are indeed that well-rounded professional business leader, which Freddy always talks about. So first, please engage in tonight's session. And the second thing, which I also just wanted to note, please also there on Viva Engage, engage also. The professional team members will also be there if you just need to ask a question or two, and also engage there. And maybe one last thing, our CEO slash your professional team member for Saturday has asked that I also pass the message to say that he would really truly like to have you face to face for those who are able to come through at our campus in Midrand, because the session is going to be hybrid. So those who are able to come through, go to our Viva Engage, vote on the poll to make sure that we prepare for the number of candidates who are going to be coming through. But otherwise, Rendani is truly looking forward to having you on a face-to-face. He says he's especially looking forward to the break conversations, the conversations you're going to have during the break and after the session. So please do also reflect if you're also going to be able to come through on a face-to-face session on Saturday. But otherwise, please do enjoy this session, engage. Unati has been in your shoes also, so you'll feel free to engage and make sure that you showcase those different professional skills which you've been gathering throughout the year. But otherwise, I don't want to also take too much time. I just want you guys to feel welcomed and make sure that, and also spread the word for those who have not yet joined. Let's make sure that everyone else comes and participate and partake on the free workshop. Thank you so much, and enjoy. I'm also going to stay. So during break, if there's anything you want to clarify, please do leave the chat. I will also engage on the side. But otherwise, between now and break time, I'm not going to be engaging because I'm expecting you guys that you'll be fully focused on the session. Thank you so much. Unati, you're welcome to take over.
Thank you so much, Ere. Sounds exciting. I'm getting all excited just listening to you. I'm feeding off of your energy, and I hope that my energy transfers. I see there is a question. I'm not sure if it's for myself or for Ere, but you can go ahead quickly. Okay. Okay, so okay, your hand is up, but you're on mute. Okay, I can't hear you. Maybe you want to pop your question in the chat if it's admin related, or otherwise then Ere will respond. Otherwise we'll get to it as we roll in the session. I'm not sure why we can't hear you. Okay, so Ere introduced me. My name is Nonguleko Unati. I am going to be taking you guys through this evening's session. Ere, if you can please just ask the team to allow me to share. I am not able to share. So while that's going, yes, Ede said that I was once in your shoes, not just that I was an APC candidate, but also that I was a repeat candidate. So I sort of know what it's like. I'm excited to be giving you guys the session and taking you guys through task C. And as soon as I'm able to share, I will get the slides up and going. But maybe in the meantime, you guys can talk to me about how it was to reflect on this task, whether you reflected on your own or whether you reflected using the screencast that I put together. I also hope I didn't speak too fast on the screencast. If you guys can maybe chat through that, and then it also gives me an idea of where to go in the session in terms of directly impacting where you guys struggle. Anyone? I'm going to put my camera off so I'm not so intimidating. I believe you've all seen me.
Hi, Unati.
Hi.
Just on the pre-release, I just wanted to get an understanding. How were we supposed to consider the share buyback? Because they mentioned that it will be a distribution, and then in the screencast, I saw you made note of a share buyback. So I'm just thinking, if something comes out like that, how are we supposed to deal with that? How do we think to that extent? Because I think I went into the distribution and not the share buyback. I thought about the share buyback as maybe another consideration that they could look at, but not in the detail that they expected on the day.
So when you say you thought about a distribution, what guided you in terms of defining what a distribution is?
I think, let me just try to open the page. Also, they said they were considering making it a distribution of the reserves. Sorry, there's an echo on my side. So they mentioned that they wanted to make a distribution of the reserves, a cash distribution. So I assumed that's just section 46 and not necessarily the share buybacks.
Well, the Companies Act also has definitions, right? So the word distribution is also defined in the Companies Act, and it defines a distribution as a transfer of the company's assets, which could be in cash or in another way, as either number one, a cash dividend, number two, a share buyback, number three, a shareholder loan, number four, the write-off of a loan. So that's actually defined in the Companies Act. So when you saw the word distribution, because Bridget said we want to distribute, you were supposed to look what a distribution is and what it could be.
Okay, and then consider all the elements that are under the definition of a distribution.
Yes, because remember she said, can you help us find a way in which we can make a distribution? Looking for more than one way. So you were supposed to have then looked at the definition of a distribution and then been able to research the different distributions that were put there, being your cash dividend, your share buyback, shareholder loans, or the writing off of a shareholder loan.
Okay, thanks.
Cool, no problem. Anyone else that wants to share? I'm trying to get the team to allow me to share my screen. There is a hand that is raised, but I can't see it right now. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah, that's me, Hunzi. So yeah, my reflection was a little intense because I'm a repeat candidate and I was essentially looking at my attempt from last year and the preparation in our file. And my team and I actually got down. So the response was a C, but I do feel like there was a bit of lenience in it, because it was very evident that to a very high extent I wasn't engaging with the information on the day. So I think my biggest takeaway was that sometimes we focus so much on what is being asked of us to do that we forget that we're there to add value. I think about, like, outside of the 3 points that they asked us to sort of address or consider, there's so much more information. And I think looking at all of those paragraphs line by line and assessing how this can impact the bigger issue would have helped pick up so many other indicators already outside of just now the three points that they want us to focus on. So I think for me, my reflection took me to don't be so focused on just what they want you to do. Like a lot of the information is given and it's not just given for the vibes. Like it's not just there for, you know, like, oh, we're just filling in some color. It is an exam at the end of the day, and we're trying to assess your professional competence and how do you consider this information and bring it into your response. I think that was sort of my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, that's actually a really good takeaway, especially when you say, I mean, it's a professional exam. If you were, for example, a tax practitioner and I came to you and I started to unpack, you know, what my finances and things are looking like, and you tell me, yeah, we can look at what you've put together for your tax return, and you look at the tax return and then you're like, yeah, it looks fine. But I actually came to you because I want you to think broader than what the normal tax return looks like, broader than my salary, broader than you know, the regular pay as you earn and the medical aid. I want you to actually ask me, are you contributing to any funds? We can actually deduct something here. Are you using a work car for travel? There's actually some stuff that we can claim back for you in that case, sort of like that. So if you're only going to focus on what it is that's been asked, yes, you'd be a professional, but I mean, how good would your services be?
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Awesome.
Okay, then there's a question in the chat about how does one ensure that you adequately apply the technical knowledge? Do you maybe want to elaborate more on that, Lee? I feel like I missed the plot and treated this as a dividend question in terms of tax, mainly instead of focusing on the bigger picture or looking at it mainly from a strategic point of view. I learned not to dump the theory and the importance of applying. Yeah, so it is very important to be able to apply it, because you can't just give the theory. Bridget could read the theory herself. So she'd ask you if everyone can please. And I see I do have ability now to share my screen, so I'm just going to share and see if it's coming up. I will finish answering the question. Okay, so yeah, you've got to be able to apply it, and applying it means explaining what it is that you would like her to do, and then also saying why it is that needs to be done. You just put the theory in there isn't going to provide any value, because Bridget can also pick up standards and just read it for herself. Cool. Everyone can just confirm that they can see my screen.
You can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. I am switching over to presentation mode, so I won't be able to see the chat. If anybody has a question, you can raise your hands, and then in between, I will take a look at whose hands are raised and then take questions so that we save time. Cool. So I've already introduced myself and I've told you that we're going to do task C, but the purpose of this session is to unpack the information on the day and then discuss how one should have actually responded to the task. So we discussed a little bit about your reflection. If everyone can please just make sure that they're on mute.
So for now, it's closed until further notice.
Okay, so we discussed the reflection. There were some good insights coming through there. Personally, when I reflect on this task, it was actually a task that I enjoyed. I found it to be quite fair, especially if you did your research and you did your research well, similar to what I had explained earlier. I mean, taking the word distribution and then wanting to understand the definition of a distribution and using that to be your guide as to how far or how wide you need to go in terms of casting your net when you're looking at distributions. I think it was also nice and integrated, so not just one aspect that needed to have been considered, even though some of you are now saying that you only considered one aspect. I found it to be nice and integrated. Okay, so part C was asking us to respond to Bridget's email about the potential share buyback. So in the screencast, what we unpacked on the reflection and on the key considerations is the things that are listed on the slide. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because the detail is in the screencast, but the things that we needed to have done in the pre-release or to have considered in the pre-release would have been to look at the directors and shareholders composition to understand that. So we were given two tables with the shareholder composition as well as the director composition. We needed to understand the composition of both those governance structures. And then further, we needed to assess whether or not there were any relationships between those governance structures. And I mean, the reason why we're doing that assessment between the governance structures is because we're trying to source any potential conflicts of interests that may arise, especially when one is a shareholder as well as a director. Then what's also key in terms of definitions, because I can see that that wasn't one of your guys' strong points, the label that was given was governance structure. So in terms of then understanding governance, the directors would have been very important when you're considering any governance issues, which is why it was put into the structure. So there was also then the discussion around the possibility to declare dividends. And here we would have wanted to understand what would have been the requirements to declare dividends specifically. They also told us that there were no distributable reserves, which is actually very concerning since they're trying to make a distribution. So here you would need to ask yourself, what does that say about their financial position? You need to think about their solvency and you need to think about their liquidity. Yeah? There was also then the mention of the losses of nearly 135 million in the previous years, which has also got an impact on our solvency and liquidity. Bridget also mentioned something about legal advice, and here, for me, it was a prompt to say there's some legislation that is applicable, or some sort of legal requirements that Bridget is aware of. So we're looking at any legislation that would talk about distributions. Then the last thing was that Bridget asked us, how can we actually distribute the cash to the shareholders? And so that's where I looked at the definition of a distribution to understand the different ways in which distributions can be made. So these are the areas that we needed to have taken a look at, especially from a Companies Act perspective. And because we're dealing with directors, like I said, you would need to remember that we're talking about governance. And then also once we speak governance, we want to think about King, because King is the code of corporate governance. So that's how you start to expand and start to get your mind to look at different areas and not just one singular area and then stay bogged down in that one thing. So at this point, I suppose I want to get an understanding if we're comfortable with the triggers and the considerations before we then move into the IOD. I am also seeing that there are some hands up. So in no particular order, I will take some questions.
Hi, evening, Unati.
Hi.
I think I'll just go first. Yeah. So my question is, I hear you where you're coming from and what you're saying, but I think I'm kind of struggling to get to how do you settle on a share buyback, because this trigger, unless I'm missing something, it wasn't clear to say what type of distribution are they gonna do. So one could have even gone to look at the bonus issue, because what we're trying to, the dilemma that they have is these people don't have cash because they've been making losses for 2 years, and the profit that they're gonna make this year is not enough to cover the losses that they've made before. So a share buyback wouldn't have been an appropriate option because you need to spend cash. So I don't know. I think I'm struggling to understand how we are concluding at pre-release to say the issue here could have been maybe a share buyback, because I think it's easy to say now because we now know the answer, but yeah, help me understand.
It's not a conclusion. So that's a very good question. It's not a conclusion that the answer is a share buyback. The pre-release says, and I quote, sorry, just had to get it open here. The pre-release says on the document, sorry. Okay, the last paragraph says, I am loath to obtain legal advice about whether On Time can declare dividends at this stage. Attorneys charge so much money for advice that we can find on the internet. Perhaps apply your mind as to how we can distribute some cash to On Time shareholders, right? So she is talking about a possibility for distributing cash. You can't at this stage say we can't distribute cash. She's asking you to think about how you can distribute cash. Then also in the beginning, she said that they were discussing the possibility of doing a dividend declaration. So we know then that the dividend part is definitely one that would need to be considered because she's specifically talking about a dividend. And then she says, how can we distribute cash? That's where in the beginning I said, you've got to look at the definition of a distribution in terms of the Companies Act. And if you look at the definition of a distribution, you will find that share buyback is listed there along with shareholder loans, along with writing off of shareholder loans. So part of your research needed to have included all of those elements as well. At that point, you cannot form any conclusions, but you also can't rule anything out. Does that make sense?
Okay, I hear you, but maybe just something before someone else comes in, right? Yeah, just to go back, if you look at the shareholders, these people have 4 shareholders, and 2 of them are directors, like executive directors. The other one is an equity fund, the other one is a bank. If you look at the nature of the shareholders, those shareholders, their returns, they don't want quick returns. So for an example, I think when I did my research, maybe it was wrong in the pre-release, but an equity fund, they are more interested in capital growth. That's what they are more interested in long term. They play the long term. So they wouldn't even agree to a share buyback. You look at something like a bank, them investing in the company, because the share buyback, it's them now, their investment being reduced in that business, and they wouldn't want that. So I'm still again struggling to see how one would have considered a share buyback, because now, when you go to the information on the day, it actually needed someone who had actually gone into town about the share buyback, yet it wasn't directly triggered as we are now seeing in the presentation. But I think, thank you.
Okay, so on what you're saying, right, about the fact that looking at the shareholder structure and which shareholders would want what, did you notice that Bridget and Sergil, the 2 of them, have a 51% shareholding? So they would in any case outvote any other shareholders because they have 51%. So even if RAFSA didn't necessarily want a share buyback and they wouldn't have approved it, it doesn't matter. They only have 30%. The people who have 51% is Bridget and Sergil. Okay, got it.
Okay, thank you.
A bit clearer. The important thing in the pre-release is not to form conclusions, and in not forming conclusions, you also cannot close yourself off. But when you're going to open the net, you need to open the net in a structured manner that shows that you've actually thought about it. So I've explained to you the reason why I went to share buybacks as part of the other things that I researched is the fact that it said distribution. I then went to the distribution definition and I saw the different things that are defined as a distribution. And then I expanded my research for distributions to include all of those aspects, not knowing what Bridget was going to say on the day. Also, at that time, I can't tell her, you can't look at this, you can't look at that. She's asking me to give her the ways in which it can be done. So my job is to give her the ways in which it can be done. I can then further advise her that even if it can be done in this way, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Okay, happy with that.
Cool. Then there was another hand that was up. So I'll take that hand and then we'll move on and then I'll pause again and take a few more hands.
Okay. I just have like a,
Can
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. I just have like a principal question, just 2 of them. So the first one, right, is that how deeply do we go with the research? Because they specifically mentioned that they're looking for like attorneys, right? What sort of information?
Oh, you got muted there. You were talking about attorneys.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. So I'm saying based on the scenario, they specifically asking about attorneys, right? As to like what information would they get from attorneys? So I'm asking, in terms of the research, how deeply do we go into researching about share buybacks and like the legal stuff involved in it? Or do we just stick to the basic information that a CA should know?
So
Sure,
for me,
that
because
makes sense. Yeah.
for me, because I'm using now my CTA knowledge, I'm understanding that Companies Act is legislation. So when we talk about legal advice, you can also obtain legal advice for Companies Act. So I would use Companies Act firstly as a point of reference for research. Then secondly, she's also saying that attorneys charge so much for advice that can be found on the internet.
Okay.
That's how she's not expecting that that they are asking for is going to require an in-depth legal analysis. And so my research wouldn't go that in-depth in other aspects. Why I'm going in depth on the Companies Act is because number one, it is legislation. Number two, it is the standard that governs companies, and it speaks about distributions. It also speaks about which distributions can be done and how they can be done, which is actually what she's asked me to do. So my focus would be more on the Companies Act, and then think about any other legislation that would potentially impact a distribution. And then very briefly, I would think about tax as a legislation.
Okay. And then just one more principal question. So if you get a scenario based on what you guys were discussing now, is that you have to do what the employer actually asks you to do, right? For example, looking for ways to make the cash distribution.
Yeah.
So in these type of questions, we actually need to find a way to make it possible. And then we can say, oh, but you know what, I recommend A, B, and C, but it mustn't be the entire answer to the question where we trying to rebuttal the whole idea, basically. Are we always supposed to find a way to make it work, basically, in terms of a practical way and how these assessments go? Is she on mute? I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Thank you. Somebody muted.
Okay.
But yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. So if your employer asks you what are the different ways that we can submit a tax return, you'll tell them that there's e-filing that's available. You'll explain how the e-filing process works. You'll also tell them that you can also walk into a SARS branch if you want to submit a return, and then explain what happens in a SARS branch if you've got to do that. You would also maybe say, I don't necessarily recommend that you walk into a SARS branch because e-filing has been set up as an easy way, but you're not going to disregard the fact that a person can walk into the branch. If I'm asking you the ways that you can submit a tax return, I'm expecting you to give me all of the possible options. I will then make the decision of what it is that I need to do based on the options you've presented and any recommendations that you're then giving me.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, let us go into the information on the day. So the information on the day was found on document C. It was the C email on the day. It's from Bridget, who we know is the CEO, and she's sending it to the financial analyst, who is us, and the subject is a proposed dividend. So Bridget says, hi there, in my email last Friday regarding a potential dividend to be paid by on time, excuse me, I forgot to mention a couple of things. Upon founding of the company on 1 January 2021, Sergil and I subscribed for 20 million rands and 31 million rands, respectively, of the shares issued by On Time. To raise these funds, we both borrowed some money from friends, used some of our own hard-earned savings, and also obtained loans from First Regional Bank. First Regional Bank lent Sergil and I 10 million rand each, subject to us pledging our on-time shares as security for these loans. So you'll remember that Sergil is the CFO and is also a director. So it looks like when On Time started, they needed the startup capital and they obtained it from different places, being friends, savings. One of those places was also from First Regional Bank in the form of a loan of 10 million rand each. And you will then also remember that First Regional Bank is also a shareholder of On Time Airlines. Cool. We're happy with the information that we've been given and what it tells us, right? Yes, no?
Happy with that.
Okay, perfect. Then they continue to say that in terms of our loan agreements, First Regional Bank now require that Sergil and I repay 5 million rand of each of our loans within the next 3 months. Dun, 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 dun. Sergil and I were hoping to roll over these payments, but the bank is not willing to do so. It is uncomfortable with its exposure to high net worth individuals. Simon Bungani, the First Regional Bank representative on the On-Time Board of Directors, emphasized that the bank's demand that we repay some of our... Oh, there's an echo. Okay, so the banks are demanding that we repay some of our loan balances is not reflective of a negative view of On-Time. It's purely a general risk reduction initiative by the bank, and Simon believes that the bank will continue to support On-Time's growth initiatives, but it is scaling back on loans to high net worth individuals. So we can see here that there's some pressure to pay back the loans, and it looks like they can't get out of it. They've tried to defer the payment, but the bank is saying, nope, you need to pay 5 million, and you need to pay that 5 million in the next 3 months. Then there's Simon, who is a non-executive director and is also an employee of First Regional Bank. So there's more relationships to be looked at here. He's also defending the bank and saying that the bank is not actually doing this as a bad reflection on On-Time, but they really are trying to reduce risk. So you can see it's quite clear that his priority here is actually the bank. Then they say that Basil Oliphant indicated that the Real Equity Impact Fund of South Africa, which is REIFSA, would greatly appreciate a cash distribution from On-Time. REIFSA is a private equity fund, and its investors require a return of capital wherever possible. REIFSA has struggled with some of its other investments due to the economic conditions in South Africa being low growth and load shedding, and a dividend from On-Time would please its investors. So Basil Oliphant is also a director and is also employed by REIFSA, who is also a shareholder. And he's also putting this additional pressure that REIFSA would like a cash distribution because it's struggling and the investors would like a return. So I suppose, Goddard, in terms of what you were saying earlier, where you say that because REIFSA is looking to fund growth and it's not necessarily looking for a distribution, they've come back to say that actually they would want a distribution because all of their other investments are not doing so well because there's low growth and load shedding and all these other economic factors. And so if On-Time could declare a dividend, then I mean that would be quite great for them. So they would want one. Okay, then they say given the pressure that Sergil and I are under from First Regional Bank, that would be Bridget and Sergil, and REIFSA's desire for a cash distribution, I believe that a share buyback of 30 million in total would hardly impact the company's bank balances and would be a win-win for all shareholders. Sergil and I could pocket enough money to meet First Regional Bank's demands and have some left to enjoy a good holiday with our families. So Bridget and Sergil are under a lot of pressure, and the other two shareholders are also suggesting that they would want cash. First Regional Bank is wanting cash because they want repayment of the loan. So First Regional Bank is not necessarily wanting a dividend, but they want the loan to be repaid. And then REIFSA is looking for a dividend. So Bridget figures the best way to do that is to do a share buyback, and then it's a win-win because then she can go on holiday with Sergil and the other two shareholders would get the cash that they're looking for. And then you kind of have to wonder whose interests are being served here, because we're looking to make Sergil happy, we're looking to make Bridget happy, we're looking to make REIFSA happy, and we're looking to make First Regional Bank happy. But no one is talking about whether or not any of this is in the best interest of On-Time. And all these people that are pushing for this thing are directors of On-Time, who are supposed to actually be looking for the best interests of On-Time, isn't it?
That's a very good question.
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to ask, like, aren't the shareholders basically standing? Okay, the company also is supposed to serve the shareholders, right?
Mm.
So then there's this double loop where now you go back and saying, okay, are they still acting in the best interest of the company? But then, if you, for example, pierce the corporate veil, who are the people behind the company? The shareholders. So the question begs: are the shareholders not supposed to benefit from the company?
So the shareholders,
considering everything is above board.
Okay, fair enough. But the shareholders benefit from the well-being of the company. So healthy company, happy shareholders, kind of like happy wife, happy life.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, if you're going to do something to please the shareholders and then
Yeah.
it's to the detriment of the company, there won't be a company left to benefit the shareholders.
I hear you. Yeah. Yeah, this thing is very open. It's very open-ended. But I think if you just show that you have good corporate skills in terms of your governance, I think everyone should be fine with this type of question.
I
didn't do it fully, yeah.
Because that's exactly it. It's
Yeah. If you can show that you're going to be ethical with any decision you make, I think everyone should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Does it make sense now what I said? I think this was a fair question.
Yeah.
Or a fair task, rather. Okay, there are more hands up, so I will take a few.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, so my question is relating to how you relate your tone in speaking to like the CFO, CEO, when it comes to ethics. So like, I don't know, I was just asking like, what are the suggestions that you have in terms of applying an appropriate tone when you speaking through ethics in a directly triggered ethics question, as well as like an ethics element to another type of question, maybe like a FINAC question. Sorry, I can't hear you, Anati.
I keep getting muted, sorry. Okay, so I would say from that perspective, from an ethical perspective, especially where you are relaying something to a senior person, you would want to remain factual. So be factual in what it is that they're asking you to do, be factual in why it is a concern for you without being overly critical. Being overly critical sounds a bit vague, but I mean, you shouldn't say things like, you are now contravening this and this act, and it means that you don't know how to apply ethics in your work. You kind of just have to say that what you're asking is this, and what it actually means is that. My concern is that it contravenes this code, and potentially these would be the consequences of contravention of that specific code. If it is something that has already happened, I would then further recommend that you provide next steps in order to remediate whatever it is that has happened. But the whole time that you're doing this, you're trying not to be judgmental, you're trying not to be overly critical, and you're not assigning blame necessarily. You're just explaining, this is what happened, this is why you're concerned. In terms of remediation, I would recommend something like this, and then maybe we can tighten up our policies to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again.
Thank you so much. I do further have, but I know, thank you, I understand. I do further have like a question where in the pre-release, you know how in the pre-release when they say something a bit uncomfortable, like what I saw was when they said that I think when Bridget said that I'm loath to obtain legal advice. That statement in general kind of made me feel uncomfortable because sometimes you do need legal advice, like especially since they were running it like an airline. As a CA, yes, we understand Companies Act, tax, but we don't really understand like the ACSA, which I would have referred her to an attorney if she wanted to ask more on regulations for like industry specific. So how do you also address something that you've identified there? Because I don't know, like, I don't know, is it something that you can relay back to the task or not? I think you're unmuted again.
Oh, they keep muting me. Are you guys secretly trying to tell me to keep my mouth closed?
No.
Okay, so so what you would do is sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. Okay, so remember, in terms of for this task specifically, where she's saying that she doesn't want to obtain legal advice, but here we know that there is legislation that governs the things that she's talking about, and this legislation is the Companies Act, which is something that you should be, quite comfortable with. You can then explain to her whatever implications it is that you know and understand. If there are other legal aspects that are above and beyond your expertise, you can then tell her, I'm actually also aware of this legislation, and this is what this legislation prescribes or dictates or describes. But in terms of understanding how to properly apply this, I think we might need to consult with a legal expert. You can even throw in a softer tone and say, I know you said you didn't want to bring in legal people, but I think on this one, we might just have to bite the bullet and call them in.
Happy, thank you so much.
Cool.
Hi, Nati.
Hi.
So with regards to the previous topic we were talking about for best interest, wouldn't the fact that Basil Oliphant is sitting in the board of directors be the one that brings in that best interest issue with the REFSA? For instance, because he's a representative of the board of OT, but he also works for REFSA. Because when I looked at so that's how I brought in that best interest. He's sitting in the board as a non-executive director, and that makes him a representative of OT. But here it looks like the REFSA preferences have changed from being investment sort of related to what they want to raise more money for their investors or protect themselves or whatever that reason is. So I brought it in like that to say, okay, so the best interest thing comes in because Basil sits directly on the board of OTA. So I thought maybe I would just confirm based on the previous speakers, I think it's AM on my team's previous speaker's comment, or as to how we then bring in the best interest when somebody else is a shareholder, and the shareholder shouldn't the shareholder get whatever they want. But just because Basil is related to RESA, would that be correct?
So what you would need to do is have a structured approach to it as well. When you want to talk best interests, you need to understand why you're bringing it in. You're bringing in best interest because Basil is a director. So you start from that angle and you say that Basil is actually a director and is supposed to operate in the best interests of On Time. Basil is also an employee of REFSA, and it's more likely that he's actually been placed as a non-executive director on the board by REFSA to represent REFSA's interest in On Time. So Basil isn't wrong for advocating for REFSA, but because he's also a director of On Time, he shouldn't be advocating for REFSA to the point where he then is not acting in the best interests of On Time. That's why when it comes to things like this, that good for self, good for others principle starts to become very important.
100%. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Last question before we move to the next part.
Okay, just an observation. There's an echo. Just an observation, right? So the 10 million that they mentioned that these guys took out, is this in their own personal capacity that they took out these personal loans, meaning that it's not actually sitting in the books of the company, it's sitting within their own personal capacity? And then
Correct. That's why Bridget says that Sergil and I could pocket enough money to meet the demands by First Regional Bank and still have enough money to enjoy a holiday with our families. Happy? Okay, you are on mute, so I'm not sure if you are happy. I see there are 4 more hands raised, so I'll take 2 more and then we can move on.
How did you make sure that you don't go down a rabbit hole with regards to this task? i.e. doing more of tax or when your research than the other companies' act requirements?
So this task didn't really talk about tax. For me, when I read this task or when I read the pre-release, she didn't really mention anything about tax. She more mentioned that they want to make a distribution. They've got losses. They don't have distributable reserves. And she's looking for a way in which to distribute the funds. So I wouldn't necessarily bring tax in here, but then because I'm supposed to think all rounded, I'm supposed to ask myself, if I made any sort of a distribution, the different options for distributions are the ones that we spoke about at length earlier. And then you would ask yourself, for a dividend, are there any tax implications? Yes. What are the tax implications? For a share buyback, are there any tax implications? Yes. What are the tax implications? For a shareholder loan that is being written off, are there any implications? Because that's also a deemed dividend. Okay, yes, there's tax implications. What are those tax implications? So and so. So for every method of a distribution that you would look at, you would ask yourself whether or not there were tax implications. And very often when it comes to tax legislation, the implication is like a paragraph at most for a specific thing. So, and let's say you researched the 4, and then in your file you had under tax, you've got this little paragraph for each of them, and then maybe you want to know if there's any accounting implications. You would maybe just put like journal entries for each of them. If there's any auditing procedures maybe for those things, you would put them there. If there's risk associated things, you would put them there. And then you've covered everything, but you haven't gone down a rabbit hole. The best way to not go down a rabbit hole is to have structure in your research. If your research is unstructured, you won't know where the boundary lines are. And that's why you need to create boundary lines so that you are researching within a specific area. And then once you've done researching in that specific area, you move to the next area. Cool. Another hand, and then we go to the next page.
Hi, Unati.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to ask at whether at the pre-release level or at the actual IoT level, if it's worthwhile to perform a solvency and liquidity calculation and then comment on that. And then also to perform the same test should the distribution actually have taken place, and then would we comment to mention section 22?
Yes, so you would definitely calculate a solvency and liquidity, because remember, you're in the business and they're asking you about distributions. And what we said earlier is that knowing that they don't have money, we wouldn't do that. But according to the Companies Act, there's specific steps that need to be met. And so when I'm going to advise Bridget, I need to actually go into those steps and then also see whether or not it's possible. So
Yes, I understand.
part of the steps in the Companies Act would be to look at solvency and liquidity. And the Companies Act does say solvency and liquidity before and after. So you would want to calculate it before. And if you're given information for after, you would also want to calculate it for after. And you would want to comment on it and say, look, I've taken a look at our financials, and actually, we're not going to pass the solvency and liquidity test because we don't have distributable reserves. And we have losses of 135 million. And this is actually what our solvency and liquidity ratios are looking like. And that shows business acumen. It shows your understanding of the business and your ability to relate what the task is against your understanding of the business.
Yes, I understand. And then just last question with the second requirement, which asked us for the key issues to be considered by the board of directors. Is there any point in mentioning that the distributable reserves are low if she already knows that? So do we address it or not?
So you would say, okay, I wanted to get more into it when we move to the next slide.
Oh, okay. No, sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Thank
Cool.
you.
All right. Moving to the next slide. This is now where the actual task was. So Bridget is asking us to consider and advise on these 3 things. Please consider the above proposal and advise Sergil and I about the following. Number 1, the high level legal requirements of the Companies Act that On Time would need to comply with in order for On Time to do the proposed share buyback. So now we know specifically which legislation it is that we're looking at, and that's the Companies Act. She's also telling us that she wants high level. She doesn't want us to go into the most detail, just really high level. Tell me what it is that I need to do from the Companies Act in order for us to do this proposed share buyback. The second thing is she wants the key issues that the board of directors are going to need to consider in deciding whether to proceed with a share buyback. Here they haven't told you key issues in terms of what, so it would be any issue that comes to your mind in the context of the case study that would affect their decision on whether or not they should proceed with this share buyback. So you would think of future company plans, you would think of any other legislation, because remember, she's now already given us that for the requirements, she's looking at that High Level Companies Act. You would then also consider any sort of economical factors. So that's where your pestle and stuff would come into play, that you would then have already applied to the case study and you would see as something that could potentially be a key issue that they would need to consider before proceeding with this share buyback. Then the third thing is any governance issues and or challenges facing On Time that are apparent from the information regarding the proposed cash distribution to the shareholders. So now they've gone and they've been specific and they're telling us they want governance issues and or challenges. So those challenges could be would also be governance issues. So it's the issues and or challenges which are both governance related. Governance for me is always that ringing of the bell that I've got to look at the directors. And when I'm looking at the directors, I'm thinking of directors' conduct, and then I'm also looking at King. So that's where King would have featured big time in this task. She then says, we will take these issues to the rest of the board of directors at a later stage. Sergil and I need to have clear thoughts on the concerns before we debate it at a formal on-time board meeting. Please keep this confidential at this stage. And thank you in advance for your input. It will be much appreciated. Thanks, Bridget. So to answer your question, Tatum, you would include it because Bridget is telling you here that these issues are going to be taken to the rest of the board of directors. Bridget and Sergil are executive directors, and so they know exactly what's happening in the business. The non-executive directors are not privy to the same information that they are privy to, but they will be part of the meeting. So you've always got to consider your audience. Who are you preparing the information for? Yes, you're preparing the information because Bridget asked you for it, but she's also telling you that the information that you're giving her, she's going to take it to another platform. So you've got to consider whether the people in that platform would also understand whatever it is that you're assuming that Bridget understands. Happiness. Okay, so we've dissected the information on the day. Any questions on the information on the day before we talk about how we would have responded to this task? Got a hand going up. Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thanks. Good evening. So here you actually have three, should I say, tasks in one. Am I right?
You've got one task with three components.
Components, okay, let's call it that. So I always struggle with the balance, right? So you find that because SAICA, they don't give you guidance, right? In terms of the amount of items that you can put per component there. So you find that maybe you've put a lot of emphasis on component one, but it's just one competency or two. Then two, so it's really around balancing that, and it's a skill that I will by end of this workshop. So I would have learned something around that in terms of balancing that especially when you've got one task with 2 or 3 components. Because I've seen previously where I've spent more time on a component, but it's just one competency, you know. So I just feel like I've wasted 30 minutes on the day where I could have just given 4 pointers just for that competency or 2 or so. Yeah.
Oh, that's a very tactful way of saying it is now my responsibility to teach you that balancing act. I'm joking. Yes, it's valid. A lot of people get stuck to say, and at an ITC level, the question normally is, how many points do I need to write under each one, and how many marks is each heading going to give me? In this arena, it's not so much about the number of things that you're putting there. It's about obtaining coverage. So you've got to balance out the issues. You also need to be very specific as to what it is that they are asking you to do. Stick to what they're asking you to do, and any sort of extras that you think would enhance your response, keep them for later. Don't go into too much detail around those things, because a lot of the things that people think will earn them HLAs, high-level indicators, are actually outside of the scope of the task, and then they go into a lot of depth of those in those things. You will find that just by discussing what you know, you can actually reach those high-level indicators. The only thing with the high-level indicators is that you need to explain it thoroughly. So you've got to actually bring proper depth, and it's got to be something that not necessarily everybody would have considered. So legislation that everybody knows, but not everybody remembers to bring it to the fore, you know? So here you were asked to do some high-level requirements on the Companies Act. Bridget is already saying, don't go into the detail, but you've got to bring in the requirements. So there, you're looking at which sections of the Companies Act are applicable and what are the requirements for those sections, and that's what you're discussing, full stop, and then you're moving to the next one. That's what a competent response would look like. To get a little bit higher than competent response, you would need to, like I said, bring in some of those forgotten sections of legislation, and we'll get into those once we actually start responding to the task. Then for the key issues, like I said, you are actually writing a case study, and your mind needs to be in the case study. You are pretend the financial analyst of this company, and so any issue that you bring to the fore needs to be relevant to this company. You can't talk about the starving kids in Africa. They are starving kids in Africa. Yes, it's a fact, but it's not really relevant to this case study. It's also not relevant to the decision on whether or not they would want to do a share buyback. So before you write it down, you need to ask yourself, if I looked at this, would it change my mind about how I vote for a share buyback? And that's how you know if it's a key issue or not. And because the case study has already been so concentrated, there's only so many of those things that you can write by staying within the context of the case study. So don't start to write things about global warming when global warming hasn't been introduced as a concept in the case study, especially if you can't tie it to something else that has been introduced in the case study. Then you would go to your governance issues. Governance issues is going to be around how your directors and shareholders are conducting themselves in the context of the case study, with reference to how you would want them to conduct themselves against the Companies Act and against the King Code of Governance. Then you're also looking potentially if there's any ethical issues, because they're saying and or other challenges. If there's any ethical issues potentially that you would bring to the fore, maybe you want to bring in general ethics issues, which you can do, or you want to bring in issues that are specific to somebody being a CA. Then you would look to see who's the CA. And if it's one person, you're also not necessarily going to go into a heck of a lot of detail explaining, you know, the CPC. It's not necessarily triggered. It's just a consideration that you need to bring to the fore. What is actually being triggered here is governance, which is King and Companies Act.
Thanks, Onati. I'm not fully answered though. So it's my first time attempting SAICA. So with Endunamo, so I've seen this, but I still struggle with the balance. So on average, can I say 3 or 4 per component? Remember, they're not asking how many high-level requirements or how many key issues. They're not asking that to say, give me 5 or give me 3. So I'm asking you, I can have 10 which are relevant. Do I put all 10 key issues? Even though
But
they're
are they all
relevant.
key? Are they all key? I mean, you know, key is like something that is of high importance. And that's why I'm saying it's something that will change your mind about how you vote. So there can be 100 issues that they would maybe need to consider, but not all of them are key. Like not all of them are going to make or break their decision to vote.
Okay, thank you.
It's like when you have to take your car in for service, maybe you're going to look at your budget, you're going to look at whether or not your car is still on maintenance plan, and then you're maybe going to look at your availability, right? Those would be key issues. Someone could say, aren't you going to consider the weather? If it's raining on that day, do you really want to drive in the rain? Or if that road has a lot of potholes? All of those things are things that you would want to consider, but it's not going to change your mind as to whether or not your car needs to go to service.
Thank you, Martin.
I hope it's making it better, because you've given me this immense responsibility and it's not going to come off my shoulders until you say that you get it. Otherwise, maybe you must consult and then we can chat about it more. How do you feel about that?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'll consult. Maybe I'll feel better. But yeah, so thank you. I think I'm a bit comfortable. I'll rather
you're getting there.
Consult just to get. I don't want to leave any stone unturned. I want to pass this thing on the first attempt. Yeah.
No, I hear you. I hear you. I'm here to help you do that. Okay, there was another question.
Hi, Nati.
Hi.
On point number 2, I just want to ask, like, if the question they say it says like other consideration, like, will be different from the key issues that the board needs to consider. And another question is on the solvency and liquidity test. Is it necessary that we perform the calculation, or based on the information at just high level, we can just conclude that the company is solvent or is liquidity? And also, like, for instance, if I conclude that the company is solvent, but then on the solution they're saying that is not solvent, but then my argument like is relevant with my conclusion, like I'll be marked like LC or.
Okay, so I like the second part of your question about the solvency and liquidity, because you kind of answer yourself by saying, or is it just high level? Because that's exactly what you've been asked for. You've only been asked for high level. You haven't been asked to do any calculations. I do want to correct you though there. You wouldn't positively conclude that the solvency and liquidity tests are not met or could not be met, purely because you only have a case study. So you only have partial information. You don't have all of the information. Bridget could come tomorrow and say, actually, there is an investor who's in the pipeline that's going to bring in 50 million. And then everything that you said is actually null and void. So you can just say, if I assess our current position based on the information that I have, it does not appear that we will meet the solvency and liquidity test.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Then I didn't understand the first part of your question. So if you could maybe just repeat that.
It's just the difference between like other consideration and key issues. Like, is it the same thing or it's different?
Oh, so you're saying if it said to you other considerations would be anything that you want to consider. Key issues, which is what I'm explaining now, is a make or break, do or die. It's going to change the way you vote. It's going to change whether your car goes to service or not.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay. Cool. Another question before we start to talk about how we would have responded.
Hi, no.
Yeah.
Oh, shame, there's 2 of you. Okay, I'll take you two, and then we'll go to the.
But you can go ahead. Come out.
Oh, okay. Sorry for that. I just wanted to ask, because I was going over this again, right? And as you also noted that with
the first and third requirement, right? Companies Act is included. Now, how far do you go? Okay, maybe it's a little clearer with the first one, but how do you avoid then repetition when it comes to that third requirement with the governance? How do I still cover Companies Act in my response, but without repeating points I may have put in the first one?
So
Right, thank you.
why do you believe, no, not thank you. Why do you believe that the key issues is also Companies Act?
Not the, I said first and third.
Okay, there you.
Yes, yes.
Okay, the best way to avoid repetition is not to write the same thing twice. If you've already written it, don't write it again.
Okay. No, I hear you. Of course, that is that. But I don't know. Maybe I'm not using it well. I get to
It means there's
but
more.
what
There's more that needs to be considered, and if you can't find the more, it means that your governance technical theory is lacking.
okay.
That's the only reason
Okay.
why you wouldn't think of it. Or it means you don't understand definitions, because a lot of the time, and again, you guys proved it when we started the class, definitions don't seem to be where you guys start when you study the theory. You guys jump to the meat without thinking of actually what does this thing mean before you take it further. So I kept emphasizing, for me, when I see governance, I think directors. When I think directors, I know that they have responsibilities in terms of the Companies Act, and they have responsibilities in terms of King. So if I've already discussed Companies Act, logic tells me that now I need to discuss King.
Okay. Okay. Now you've answered me. Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
Hello,
Hi.
how's it?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's very hot, but I'm okay. How are you?
I'm okay. I actually have a statement and a question. Nah? My first statement is that on this question, I wrote it last year. Nah? And I think I was graded BC or LC, I don't remember, but it was not a C. That was mainly because of the context switch, because in pre-release, they spoke about dividend distribution. And on the day they talk about a share buyback. It threw me off. But that was evidence of poor preparation from my side, because both the dividend distribution as well as the share buyback, they are not the same, but they follow the same process, meaning that you needed to still go and assess solvency and liquidity, approval from delegated officials and stuff like that. And then now it came again in my support USTD. I managed to get a straight pass on that one, mainly because in pre-release, they spoke about the dividend distribution. I regarded that as a problem, but I said, hang on. I understand that they are talking about a dividend. Dividend distribution. But now, what are the other alternatives that we can consider other than the dividend distribution? That's how I go to a share buyback and realize that it follows the same process. So that's why I managed. That's how I managed to maneuver on the day and get that competent. Two, my question is one. There was actually a lot of information because in pre-release I did prepare about the dividend distribution from last year, from on time, I mean, and then on the day there was actually a lot of information. There was contact switch and there was a lot of information. I think about 3 pages. So it threw me off and I didn't know where to start. I mean, that information where they're talking about people going on holidays and stuff like that, I didn't know as to whether I must mount it on number 2 or number 3. It really threw me off. That's how I got to be graded lower. Maybe you can advise when we are given a lot of information. Thanks.
You mean a lot of information in this task specifically?
In this task specifically.
Oh, it was 1 page, wasn't the IOD 1 page and the pre-release was also like 1 page?
1.5 or 2, yeah, but yeah, it was a lot.
Okay, okay. A lot is relative, I'll give it to you. Okay, so in terms of people wanting to go on holiday, why would you want it to be a key issue? isn't it something that's related to the directors and their actual conduct? Doesn't that maybe point you to governance? Yes, no?
So no,
Please ask that
Unathi,
again.
my question was, you're given a lot of information, né? But I didn't know how to place it or how to answer, where to touch, you know?
But you touch where it
maybe you can
relates
give
to.
us.
You touch where it relates to. Like I said, you're talking about the holidays. Who's going on holiday? The directors. When we think directors, what do we think? We think Companies Act and King, right? So you touch where it's relevant. That's how you deal with a lot of information. You take it step by step. You see how we've been reading this? We've been reading it paragraph by paragraph and then discussing it. And in discussing it, we're discussing what it actually means. And understanding what it means getting an understanding of where it comes from. Once you know where it comes from, you can then source the relevant theory and then apply it in the context of the case study, further in the context of what it is that you've been asked to do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it.
Must start at the beginning.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Noted. Thanks.
Okay, so we are running out of time and I want us to get into the structure. So let's do the structure, sort of discuss what it is that we would have put in there, and then we can take some more questions if there's still some time before the next session. Cool. So if we think about a structure, maybe, because a lot of people struggle with structure, you find people's responses are all over the place. What would have been nice is to have a structure that aligns to what Bridget is asking us. So if you read the email, Bridget is saying that you've got to look at the three things. So you would perhaps put together an email with an introduction, maybe, "Hi, Bridget, thanks for the opportunity to provide input on this critical task. Please find attached my considerations on your proposal. I've considered and advised on the high-level requirements of the Companies Act, the key issues that the Board of Directors should consider, and any governance issues that I think are related to this distribution. Regards, analyst." Then I'll have a nice little attachment where I would perhaps use headings to differentiate between the three things that I've been asked to do. So I would have one heading that talks about high-level requirements for Companies Act. I'd have another heading that talks about key issues for consideration, and another heading that says governance issues or challenges. Then under the Companies Act, what I would want to consider, part of my research, when I looked at the definition of a distribution, I was told that there is a share buyback that was an option, and I learned that a share buyback goes to section 46. So I would discuss section 46, and the requirement under section 46 is that I need to have a board resolution. Then we also need to assess our solvency and liquidity. So I would discuss around the solvency and liquidity test, talk about how it should actually be applied, and then knowing that in the scenario they have right of use assets and lease liabilities according to the definition of the Companies Act. When it comes to solvency and liquidity, those things needed to have been excluded from the test in order to get the fair value, because the Companies Act defines solvency and liquidity as your assets and liabilities fairly valued at the time of the share buyback. Then also because when we're talking about liquidity, we're talking about the next 12 months. I've got to apply the ability for on time to pay within the next 12 months. And also knowing that because it's in the next 12 months and regional bank wants this payment to happen within the next 3 months, I know that liquidity is definitely something that is important to consider in this case. Then because now we're talking about our solvency and liquidity test, we said that the requirement is that you've got to meet the solvency and liquidity test before and after the distribution. So after the distribution, where they're talking about distributing 30 million, that 30 million is actually going to further reduce my net asset value. And so maybe I can meet solvency and liquidity before, but after I distribute 30 million, I don't know that I will still be able to meet solvency and liquidity. So there's got to be the discussion about before and after. Then remember we spoke about these relationships with the directors and the shareholders, where some of our shareholders are also directors and vice versa. It's very clear here that Sergil and Bridget have a conflict of interest because the whole motivation around this is the fact that they need to repay loans that they took in their personal capacity. So them being in the meeting means that they have a personal financial interest. I also know that there's a Companies Act section on that, and it's also a requirement. And so they would then need to recuse themselves from that decision. Then if there is, yes.
Sorry, are you sharing a structure or are you sharing the three components?
Oh, I'm still sharing the information on the day. I didn't put together a separate response for you guys.
Like a structure, some form of a structure as you suggested. Like I told you, I want to face like a face-to-face this time.
You want to face them face-to-face?
I want to see a structure, yeah.
Okay, so if I say to you that you have an attachment and your attachment has 3 headings, is that not a structure? Can that not help you go toe-to-toe with Psycha?
So I can continue to talk to it, but I was hoping to see some sort of a structure, even though you just put pointers and talk to them. But yeah, you can continue.
But the structure. Oh, sorry, I've gone to the next slide. I wanted to show you here the structure. The structure is. My PowerPoint is not playing fair. The structure is here. This is the structure, is it not?
Sharing IOD.
Yes, but is that not the structure? The high level.
No, this is not the structure, Onati. The structure when you now respond to Bridget, you can use Word or anything. So just some form of a structure, Onati.
Okay, no, sorry, I didn't prepare a response because I'm taking you through it and we're talking about potentially how we could respond. Everybody's response will look different, so it would be unfair for me to give you a response as though it were a memo.
Okay. Let's proceed because of the time, but yeah, thank you. You can talk to the point.
Okay, cool. Then we know also when Companies Act requirements are not adhered to, which we can sort of see is going to be the case here, we've got to consider that the directors can be held liable. So we would bring in a little bit of a discussion around Section 77, and that would be our Companies Act. Are we happy with the high-level Companies Act requirements? And can everybody see that we haven't gone into detail, but we have touched on the important parts of the Companies Act? Happy? Cool. Then, when we talk about the key issues that need to be considered, they told us in the pre-release that currently On Time is facing some business risks, which is where they're struggling to keep up with the jet fuel prices, the competition in the industry, the volatility of exchange rates, the economic conditions in South Africa, and also the post-COVID pandemic effects. So that's also an area where the business is struggling. So where the business is struggling, you wouldn't necessarily want to distribute cash because you don't know when it would be needed. And then again, in the same breath, not knowing when that would be needed, you also know in the pre-release that they've spoken about these growth initiatives that they want to bring in. They want to lease a new aircraft and they want to create a route flying to George. So the decision to distribute dividends or to distribute to do this share buyback is going to impact the cash that they have to apply these growth initiatives, and it is also something that would need to be considered in the cash flow forecast when deciding on the solvency and liquidity, or when assessing the solvency and liquidity rather. Then when it comes to the share buyback, because they are purchasing shares, anything that is purchased has a value. Considering that On Time is not listed, the question here would be who would determine the value for those shares. So potentially they would need to undertake a valuation in order to determine whether or not this 30 million is going to be sufficient for the share buyback transaction that they want to undertake, or if that 30 million is maybe too much, maybe the shares are overpriced, but who's derived the value? And that is something that they would need to consider as a key issue. And then we spoke briefly as well about the tax consequences. We saw already that the legislation was discussed on a Companies Act level, but you do also know that there is tax consequences when you're making distributions. And so you would discuss the potential tax consequences around this share buyback. When we look then at governance issues, we would talk about the dilemma that they've got, this potential ethical dilemma that they've got, Bridget and Sergio, because they want to do this share buyback so that they can pay off their loans, not necessarily because it is in the best interest of On Time. Also, it seems, like we said before, that these non-executive directors, which is Basil and Simon, are also not necessarily acting in the best interest of On Time. So that's also something that you would bring to the fore. And if you analyze the director structure a bit more closely, you would see that there actually aren't even enough independent non-executive directors on the board. I think there's only one. So there's only one person who is truly independent that would make decisions that are in the best interest of On Time. And then you could have discussed any other sort of ethical considerations that would fall under governance that are also still within the context of the case study. Principles like good for self and good for others would also be features in this section. Okay. Any questions on our outline?
Would reckless trading not be applicable? Sorry. Because if they're using the company, they wanted to distribute a dividend so that they can pay for the loan that they've made. Why wouldn't you consider reckless trading? I know in the Psycha video, they said it wasn't applicable, but I want to still understand why.
So reckless trading also has its own definition, and you would need to go according to the definition. I wouldn't have penalized somebody who wrote that reckless trading was something to consider, but also to be brief about it and not to go into, major detail on it. I know what you say, that Psycha in the video said that it's not applicable, but having written it isn't something that was going to unfairly disadvantage you. Cool.
Hi, Unati.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to ask. So with regards to King 4, I'm of the opinion that you bring it in when it applies to public companies or listed companies. So in the situation of a private entity, how would you bring that in? And maybe is there something I'm missing as to how King 4 would apply in this instance?
So King 4 is mandatory for listed companies. You're correct there. But for private companies, King 4 is considered to be best business practice. So even though they are not mandated to comply with the requirements, where it's practical and financially feasible for them to do so, it is recommended that they do so.
So would I state that before then going into King 4? Is that how I bring that point in? I mean, King 4 points in.
I don't think you necessarily have to bring an explanation. You could just say King 4 recommends, and once you're saying recommends, you're making it very clear that it's not mandatory for them to subscribe to this thing.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. We have a few more minutes left if there's any other questions. Okay, it doesn't seem.
Hi, Unati.
Oh, sorry, I almost said there's no questions.
You have a few questions, but there's the in sequence from Ipile. I don't know if Ipile wants to go first.
Okay, whoever, go for it.
Okay, since I got the mic. So there's an email around expansion. So if I bring that element of that document 8, I think it's document 7 or 8, right? So they want to expand. Of course, they require funding. If I bring that element here to say, why would you then consider the distribution of dividends while you have that expansion strategy? Is it an issue to consider here or not? Or you can only consider it if it's if the distribution is in cash or retained earnings?
No, it's definitely a consideration, because remember, if they distribute the cash, it reduces the cash that they have available to implement this expansion. So you need to tell them that here you're going to need to look at a bit of an opportunity cost, because giving the dividends or doing the share buyback would be the opportunity cost for expansion, or vice versa. You might not be able to do both. You might have to give, or you might have to choose between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. 2 minutes left before you guys.
Hi,
go
Unati.
break. Yes.
Oh, question. You mentioned the board composition issue, that there aren't sufficient independent board members, right, to make such decisions. But what recommendation would be appropriate to make in that instance? Because now we'll just be mentioning an issue. Would it not be better to say what should be done instead to resolve that, or to
I
address
like to
that issue?
shy away from recommendations when they are not specifically asked for. You were asked to advise on the decision, right? So part of that was raising any governance issues. From a governance perspective, you raised that you are concerned about the directors being able to vote in the best interest, especially if you think about Section 75. Once Section 75 is implemented, that means that Bridget and Sergil are not in the meeting. Then you've got the two non-executive directors. They are also technically not independent in this decision. They benefit from this decision. So if you wanted to be really strict, then they might also have to recuse themselves. Then there's really actually only one person left who can vote. Is that really, so it doesn't really make sense, isn't it? So you would bring it in from that perspective to say, I'm actually concerned about the governance structure, because if you actually look at this thing, there aren't enough people on this board that would make decisions that are, especially for this decision itself, there aren't enough people that would make a decision that is in the best interest of on time.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
It is 8 o'clock. If Ele will let me, I will take one more question and then I will hand back over to her.
Go for it, Tunati. I see there are 4 hands. Yeah, maybe we can take up to 5. You'll be just taking the break time because they need to resume at 20:15.
Okay. So we'll take the 5 that are there, and then after that we will sort of cut it off. Let me get my other screen open so I can see whose hands exactly, and then cut off there. Okay, Ipile, go for it.
Sorry, that was raised in error. I'm so
No
sorry.
problem. Is it Chichikawe?
Hi, Unati. It's
Hi, sorry,
Chitsikawe.
Chichikawe, sorry.
No problem. Unati, I just have a question. So if, for instance, in a task you note an ethical matter, is it a must for you to bring it in your response to also highlight that I also noted that we have an ethical matter in this maybe context or scenario?
Yes. If there's something wrong, you should tell your bosses. They're either unaware or they're not aware that you are aware that it's an ethical issue. So you need to raise it. CAs actually in general in business need to learn how to speak up. You've got to say when something is wrong. Just be careful how you say it.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Cool. Memory? Memory, you are still potentially on mute. I see you are unmuted, but I can't hear you. So maybe Tepo, you can go first, and then Memory, once you've sorted out your audio stuff, you can come back. Tepo? Hello?
Hi, Unati, can you hear me?
Yes, I was starting to think maybe my sound is wrong. Thank you. What's up?
Oh, okay. I just have a quick one in terms of application. So with the share buyback, because like the requirements that we're looking at in terms of Companies Act is like in line with Section 48, right? So where it's saying that the company shouldn't like buy back the shares where it will end up where like the company doesn't have any shares in issue. Like, do I have to go like an extra step in terms of applying that? Because we were not actually given like the actual numbers of shares being bought back and all of that. So do I just need to put it there and then just note that like I don't know if like
I hear you. It hasn't been triggered that they would be buying all of the shares back because they are looking to get money for Bridget and Sergio. So they would likely only be buying Bridget and Sergio's shares. On that point, Section 114 and Section 115 are then applicable or potentially applicable because Bridget and Sergio combined have a 51% shareholding. It is more likely that they would purchase in excess of the 5% requirement. In Section 114 and 115. And that is something you would bring in because that you can link directly to information that is in the case study.
okay, so like in my response, I don't have to put down that requirement because it's not triggered, or I just need to put it down. But
the requirement that I just gave you is triggered.
Okay, get it.
Remember, this Section 114 and 115 of the Companies Act says that when you're doing a share buyback in excess of 5%, there's specific requirements and things that become applicable. So if we are saying that Bridget and Sergio are the ones who need the money, when we're doing a share buyback, it's more likely that we will be buying Bridget and Sergio's shares because in the information, we don't have anything that suggests that we will also be purchasing back RAFSA and Regional Bank. That's why your scenario is less likely, where you're purchasing in excess of what is available. So knowing that you're looking at the two, which is Bridget and Sergio, you're looking at a combined shareholding of 51%. So we don't know how much, you're correct, we don't know how much of the shares they're going to purchase back, but it is likely that it could be more than 5%. And so to say that, and then say that Section 114 and 115 would now be applicable is a higher level application. So it's a Companies Act section that people should be aware of, but not everybody would remember to bring it, like what I explained earlier.
Okay, yeah, I see in terms of like Section 48.8, it does indicate if they're buying more than 5%, it refers you to Section 114 and 115.
Correct.
So in that case, do I need to put down the Section 48.3, but there won't be any like application where it will just be like the requirement and then highly apply or like put more emphasis on Section 114 and 115 because that's directly triggered?
No, so I mean, I've just explained it to you. So you would explain it exactly like that. The way that we have these conversations is actually the way that you respond. You just neaten it up and make it more professional. You would explain to them that Bridget and Sergio have a combined shareholding of 51%, and therefore it is likely that the buyback would be more than 5%. In this case, we need to consider Section 114 and Section 115.
Okay.
And there you've applied it. It's also a higher level because not everybody would have thought about it.
Okay, Natalie, thank you.
Cool. Memory, are you sorted out or do we do Lee first? Okay, memory still seems to not be sorted out. Lee, are you ready to go?
With the application of section 114 and 115, sorry, just to take you back, wouldn't that just be I know the SICA put it in, and I know you said a high level indicator, but isn't that an assumption? Because you're assuming that.
You're not assuming, you're giving Bridget a possibility. It is possible. It's not an assumption. You are explaining what is possible. They have I mean, if they want to do 30 million, they're probably purchasing more than 5%.
Okay, no,
If you think of the value of on time, and they both combined have a shareholding of 51%, so it is possible for them to purchase more than 5%.
No, noted. Then going forward, should one do SICA past papers too, just to refine?
Whenever it comes to past papers, my philosophy is quality over quantity. Also be careful when you're going back to SICA papers where legislations and standards and things have changed, because SICA's not going to go back and update those for you. So I wouldn't go down the rabbit hole of doing past papers too much. But
can you define what quality means?
You've got to do it properly. So if you're going to do it, you're going to read your pre-release. You're going to then do research. After you've done your research on your pre-release, you are then going to look at your IOD and your task list, and then you are going to attempt it, and then you are going to assess yourself. So you're not going to look at the IOD while you are reading the pre-release and then saying, oh yes, yeah, these two make sense. This is what I'm going to do, because that's not actually how it's going to happen in your 5 days. So properly means simulate the 5 days, except not in 5 days. You'll break it up however many days you have available for you to study. Okay, memory, I'm going to give you one last try.
Just a quick question. Is there anything wrong with that part where they talk about pocketing money to have a good holiday? Is there like an ethical undertone we're supposed to talk about there, or can we just let it go?
You can bring it in but you would bring it in under governance, and you would bring it in under discussion of the best interests. They're not doing it in the best interest of on time. They're doing it in the best interest of themselves, because the motivation here is so that they can pay off the loans and then potentially go on holiday.
Okay, by extension of the distribution.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, memory, I'm crossing fingers for you one more time. Oh, we can't get memory. And oh, is that memory? Are you coming through? Memory, you've got to face your teams head on, like how Twitter was to face SICA. Okay, we're not winning with memory. Oh, hi.
This is not memory. I just wanted to say I think they may have posted their question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let me see in the chat. Where is memory? I can't see memory. You guys have been very busy. Oh, my issue with regards to the audience in this case, the CEO indicated that the issues will be taken to the board. So who is my audience here? If it's the board, how will my response be different if my audience was the CEO only? So that's similar to Tatum's question. Tatum was asking whether or not it needs to be stated that there's losses, because Bridget already knows that there's losses. But here we're told that this information is being prepared so that Bridget and Sergio can first debate it. Once they've debated it, they're going to then present it to the board of directors. There are people on the board of directors who don't have the same information that Bridget and Sergio have, because Bridget and Sergio are executive directors. They are within the thick of things, whereas the other directors are non-executive, and so they are not within the thick of things. And then also in terms of their understanding, you don't necessarily know if everybody has a finance background. So when it comes to certain finance things, the way that you explain it for somebody who is a CA is not necessarily the way that you would explain it for somebody who's not a CA. Similar with Companies Act. You don't necessarily need to go into quoting sections and things like that, because that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for the core requirements. So give them those requirements. you just need to be able to use your judgment to assess what it is that you can reasonably expect your audience to know. And that is what tells you how your response should be different based on who you're preparing the response for. Memory, I hope I've answered your question. And I don't know if you can indicate that maybe with like a thumbs up. Perfect. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. I don't know if they come from memory, but I'm hopeful that they do. Okay, guys. I think I did 7 instead of the 5. You guys want Ede to kill me. There's 2 minutes left until 1:45. There's one more hand that's up. I'll take that last one and then I'm handing over to Ede. Khonsi, you are lucky winner number 8.
Yo, listen, it's my day. So for me, right, happy that, because even when I was looking at the cycle videos, they very much go into those 3 points, which is fair. But for me, I think throughout the board course, like critical thinking has been something that they've sort of emphasized, and that again, no one is going to give you a lot of information for the vibes. So it just feels like there hasn't been enough focus on some of the items, for example, tackling that 5 million that they have to repay back and whether it does have an impact on a negative view on time. So then my question then is would I be wrong to include a 4th point in addition to the 3 considerations they require, just to say, in light of the information you mentioned, you forgot to share in the prior week's email, I've just like high level included a few considerations in that regard, because it just feels like we tackle these 3, but there's so many other items that they've mentioned in the IOD that it feels like we didn't engage with.
No, they're telling you that them wanting this money is not a reflection on them thinking that there's something wrong with on time. So if there's nothing wrong, you wouldn't discuss it in detail. Like you wouldn't. And them trying to say that is they're trying to bring in that this is what Simon is saying. Simon is saying that it's not a bad reflection, and that is showing you where Simon stands on the fence. He seems to be on the side of First Regional, and he's trying to, push that angle with Bridget.
Because my thinking was more so to say it to an extent, if it's a signal, there's a potential signaling issue. Should it be known that we're unable to pay this 5 million, or like, I don't know, like it just felt like there wasn't enough focus on that. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it also isn't known that they're unable to. It just seems that they don't, have the cash ready now, and they would prefer not to have to pay it in the next 3 months. We don't know that they don't have the cash. Bridget is just saying that in order to fund this repayment of the loan, she would want to do some sort of a distribution.
Yeah. And I mean, in the case they're unable to, though, does that not potentially tarnish our relationship with FRG and potentially our future prospects, thereby having an actual impact on times, or the view, or negative impact on time?
Well, not really. These are loans that are taken in personal capacity. It's not a loan between On Time and First Regional Bank. It's a loan that Bridget and Sergio have taken in their personal capacity.
And directors represent the company. So it just feels like, but I get what you're saying. I think I'm going on a tangent, but it just feels like
how you guys go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, but it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Guys, I am at 2016. I am way over time, and LA is going to kill me. So
I'm not killing you. I think I second Muraro there to say that it sounds like you guys have opened a consultation here. And secondly, I'm saying that Unati is not displaying time management, which is one of the the EPC 9 competencies. So yeah, but otherwise, maybe we'll just give you 3 minutes, and Katleho will start at 2020 to make sure that we also don't overrun too much. But I'm sure you guys enjoyed the break between the questions which were coming through. So yeah, Katleho will start at 2020. Thank you so much, Unati. Much appreciated.